So today we're going to talk about C. Wright Mills and sociological imagination. This is a theory that C. Wright Mills developed in order to really understand how people understood their relationship to society. So this is a really good theory to start with to talk about what do we mean by the sociological perspective. So to begin with, I just wanted to go over a few points that kind of detail the background to the theory. So the first thing that C. Wright Mills noticed is that he felt that extrinsic forces constrain behavior. And what he meant by this is that social forces that exist in society often make people feel like they're trapped. So these are things that are not of the individual level, but at the social level, where people feel like it's acting on them, but they really can't act back on it. The second point has to do with impersonal changes in the social structure. Again, this feeling that the social forces that exist in society are impersonal. There's no individual reason as to why they happen, but they do, in fact, determine the success and failure of men and women. And so for Mills, it was really, this point is about the perception that people have about social structures. The social structures sort of trap people. They kind of contain what they can and cannot do in their everyday life. The third point has to do with the other end of the spectrum and looking at sort of the individual aspects of people in society. So this point has to do with how people understand their own personal troubles. And he found that people do not often associate their troubles with history or structural changes, intricate relationships with person and society, biography and history, or self and the world. And so really what he's saying here is that when people do experience problems, they don't necessarily see it as an external thing. They see it as purely individualistic. That if one loses their job, or in fact does well in their job, that has to do with themselves and not these sort of larger systemic issues like history or structure or relationships that they have with others, etc. Um, and then finally, he found that when there was rapid social changes, people felt out of step, specifically with their values. So not only do social forces exist as sort of this external, extrinsic thing that people feel trapped by, social changes, extreme social changes, um, make that even more so. And because these social changes are happening, people no longer can orient themselves. And what we mean by values is more of what does it mean to have a happy life? What does it mean to be successful? What is the meaning of life? And when there are rapid social changes happening, people lose their idea as to what the answer is to all these questions. So because people often feel trapped and they don't necessarily see a connection between themselves and the larger social structures, C. Wright Mills developed what's called the sociological imagination. And this slide is basically a quote taken from his book. So I'm going to read that and explain it to you a little bit. The sociological imagination enables its possessor to understand the larger historical scene in terms of its meaning for the inner life and the external career of a variety of individuals. It enables him to take into account how individuals, in the welter of their daily experience, often become falsely conscious of their social positions. Within that welter, the framework of modern society is sought. Within that framework, the psychologies of a variety of men and women are formulated. By such means, the personal uneasiness of individuals is focused on explicit troubles, and the indifference of publics is transformed into involvement with public issues. So in this quotation, he's really trying to understand why people tend to individualize their daily experience as a personal problem. But when given this perception with a larger understanding of sociological perspective, the relationship between themselves and history, themselves and others, can help them to imagine how to deal with social problems on a public and a collective level. And that's sort of what he felt like was the first step of the sociological imagination. So given that we're covering a sociological perspective, within the sort of theory of the sociological imagination, there are three important questions that a social analyst will apply to any social group. The first is, what is the structure of this particular society as a whole? And this really gets at the fact that societies differ from one to the other, and that societies are structured very differently. And what we mean by structure is how a society is structured by, say, education or family or the economy or politics. All these elements structure society in a particular way that we, as a social analyst, would really want to try to understand. The second is, where does the society stand in human history? This is looking at the fact that society evolves and changes, and that society does not stay the same. It's not static. So social analysts will really try and understand this particular moment in time, what does society look like? And then finally, what varieties of men and women now prevail in the society and in this period. So given that as human beings we undergo processes of socialization, the character, the kind of people that we are, the society is different than other societies. And in relationship to the sociological imagination, this really has to do with whether or not people perceive um, their problems on a very individualistic level or collective level. And this really then matters as to how much they're able to appropriate a sociological imagination. Finally, he differentiates between two different concepts, troubles and issues. Troubles are a private matter where values may be threatened, but primarily have to do with the self. So if there is a problem, people in this kind of concept, in this conceptual model, tend to reduce it as an individual problem of their decision making. It's not seen as collective. The second issue or second concept is issues. This is different in the sense that the trouble is transformed as a public or collective problem. So issues transcend the individual to the organization of many troubles that has an impact on the institutional level. It reflects structural problems, a value that the public feels is being threatened. To solve these problems, it takes a structural, collectively made solution. So issues then cannot be reduced to one person. It cannot be reduced to any kind of individualistic decision making, but rather it affects many people, and therefore requires a collective response. So, for example, gun control. So this has become a public issue, cannot be reduced to one person, and that many people are affected. So the possibility of sociological imagination can be applied here in a sense in which people could imagine what the collective decision could be, and how that would then affect social structures and institutions.